Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Hirsch, president of the New York chapter of the Retail Design Institute. I'd like to welcome you all to the New York chapter's virtual evening of storytelling. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Retail Design Institute, we are a networking group consisting of professional members of the retail industry from across the globe. Together, we promote the advancement and collaborative practice of creating, selling environments. Typically, we host events in retail spaces to hear about the design concepts used to capture the story of the brand. However, due to the current state of the world, we have adapted to hosting Zoom events to continue to provide our members with the opportunity to enhance their growth, to learn and inspire them. Please bear with us as this is our first virtual panel event. Moderating our event tonight will be Diana Revkin, Studio Director at TPG Architecture, and also Sponsorship Chair for the New York chapter of RDI. And with that, I'll hand over the reins to Diana.
Good evening, everyone. Really glad to have you attending our Retail Design Institute event tonight. The idea for tonight's presentation began with a discussion back in February about what to do that might be around something other than trend-driven content. And we decided that especially with all of the darkness and anxiety that was in the news about COVID, that we wanted something more uplifting. So we decided to do the topic of inspiration and creative process and storytelling. So here we are tonight. We have three really gifted storytellers with us tonight that are going to tell about their creative process for developing a visual narrative. There's a lot of history between the connection of storytelling in window display and design and theater design, and we're going to explore that a little bit and see a little bit of that connection in their work. So I'm going to start right now, or shortly, by introducing our panelists, Roya, Brett, and Jason. And after that, they're going to roll into their presentations. While they're presenting their work, feel free to send questions through on the little question and answer tab at the bottom of the screen. And after the presentations are complete, we'll be having a dialogue among our panelists, and then we will open it up and talk about some of the questions that you have as our audience. So a little teaser also before we begin. In our June event, we're also going to have a part 2 of storytelling, which will be focusing a little bit more on developing brand narrative as part of an overall business strategy. So it's an ongoing conversation about storytelling. And we have some more great guests lined up for the June event as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, starting with Roya Sullivan. Roya, who recently joined Harlequin Design London as VP of Projects and Client Services. You may know Roya from her long and stellar career at Macy's, where she served as National Director of Windows Presentation. And her work has won numerous industry awards throughout the retail and fashion sectors. And she's been published in the New York Times, USA Today, Entrepreneur, and Psychology Today, among other magazines and news venues. We also have with us Brett Banakis, who is a designer for theater, opera, film, environment, and live performance. Brett's Broadway design credits include The Cher Show and upcoming productions of The Devil Wears Prada and The Notebook. Brett currently serves as the International Scenic Supervisor for worldwide productions of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. And Brett oversaw the architectural and interior design of the Lyric Theater on Broadway as part of the Harry Potter production when it moved from the West End, and has also designed theaters in Melbourne, San Francisco, Hamburg, and Toronto. And he's a faculty member of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts graduate program. And the panelist who we're going to start off with is Jason Shepard, who is the technical director for the Loyola Marymount University Theater Arts and Dance Department. And he's worked there on over 200 productions at LMU since 1997. Jason has also designed many sets for LMU, including Noises Off, Once in a Lifetime, A Raisin in the Sun, Macbeth, The Elephant Man, and many more. He's also designed sets for several theater companies in LA and stage managed and directed plays and workshops in Southern California. Jason is also a singer-songwriter and musician for the LA-based alt-country band Suicide Cowboy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and his presentation.
Thank you so much. You got me on my audio working?
Your audio, I believe, is working.
Okay, great. All right, let's see if I can thank you so much, Diana, if I can take control here. There we go. So I'm going to discuss a little bit today, since our topic is storytelling, the play Runaways, which I did the set design for our department in 2017. Runaways is a Elizabeth Swartos play that she wrote and directed and choreographed in the late 70s in New York. It's basically a story about, she went to homeless shelters and all over the city and interviewed kids who had run away from home or from a boyfriend or from a predator, and got their stories and combined them into poems and songs and monologues and put this production together. So I thought this would be a good, since the subject is storytelling, kind of a good design to discuss my process in designing this in 2017 when we decided to do this at Loyola Marymount University. So the first thing, got some photos but not the text, but that's all right. This is a little bit of a page on research for the production. New York City is a character in this play. This interesting thing about this story and this play is that they don't give you a lot of locations besides New York City. They don't say like, this is in a bar, or this is in a restaurant, or this is on a street corner. It's just happens in New York City. There's a couple references to things like the basketball hoop you see in the corner there. So the top is kind of just a basis of starting on researching textures and the environment. And then the bottom row there is kind of talking about a little bit more scenic elements that we can use in this story. All right, let's see. So one of the things you'll see in the very beginning, I wanted, since New York City was such a character in this story, is I wanted a big backdrop of a big, bold cityscape. And I kind of used this, you can see where I kind of found this image, removed the sky, and then it actually made its way into some of the early models for our production. But early on, our director had a kind of a different vision. And one of the things I kind of want to discuss today in storytelling is collaboration, and theater is a very collaborative art. You know, the director has their vision, as does the scenic designer and costume designer and props and projections, and it goes on and on. So you're really working as a collective. So one of the things that I had to work with early on is when I brought this kind of early rendering of an idea for the backdrop to the director, she wanted something much more abstract. So you can see in the picture on the left, she came to me and said, I would prefer it just to be, you know, this painted or something, but I still wanted to use some kind of hardcover version to make it work. So we kind of evolved from this picture on the left to developing this picture on the right here, which is a little more watercolory version of a cityscape, but still with a little bit more of an outline. And then we kind of landed on, I think in the next slide here, you'll see, I just did kind of a basic watercolor hardcover flat version. So it was a little bit of a meeting in the middle throughout this collaborative process of making this kind of design work. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I think that's a lot of things people don't often realize, that in the storytelling of theater, this collaborative process of making the ideas work and kind of meeting in the middle on things where you have to. So the next phase, as you can see, we have, I started kind of moving into some of my just design of the stage. And you can see these are overhead ground plans. Our theater has a revolve or turntable in it, which is that big circle you can see in the middle there. We have an old theater. It's not really that great of a space. The revolve is one of the great things we have in there. So whenever I'm designing there, I try and use it. If it fits, if it helps me tell the story of the play, I'll try and incorporate it. So you can see this, there's several different versions and locations of how the stage kept moving and spinning around to get us into these different street locales of New York City. You can see some of the elevations, the digital elevations, I think, are on the next page. So you can see this was the next phase for me, is once we kind of locked down, these are the pieces, these are the elements, we started putting together the elevations of what all the scenic pieces on the stage would become. And you can see some of the early research, the dumpster, the basketball hoop, the fire hydrant, that stuff started making its way into the design. And there were objects we either created or found or rented to start to kind of build this world of the play. I think on the next slide, this is, I'm not sure if the video will work here. Oh yeah, there we go. This is an early whiteboard model you can see that I made with the chain link, and it actually has the old cityscape still in the background, but this is I used to show the director, there we go. Let's see if this works. Just kind of an early idea of how the Revolve could spin scenery around and give her different ideas of ways to use the stage. So you can see his stuff was kind of moving around and moving into place there. It was very useful for the director because she basically took little blocks representing the actors, took this model that we made, and staged the whole play before she had the plays. It's a large cast, 25, 30, I think, in the cast with the ensemble. So it ended up being a way that she could visualize what she was going to stage before she got in the room. I don't know if I have the, can't quite get to the arrows here. Oh, there we go. Let's see what we got next here. Oh, there it is again. Okay, so then the next step for me was making a color model of basically the whiteboard version that I used to float the idea of how this would work, just to see if it would work for what the director's vision was. So you can see a couple versions here of the color model. I think it's a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch scale model. And you can see the turntable there used to rotate these pieces around so you can get an idea of what this would look like staging wise. I think I have one more in here. Oh, and you can see this is, I just put this slide in here. The very end of the play, they go to this information center. There's this information center idea that opens up. So you can see in the top photo, there was this little kind of corner rusted plaster area where they did some of the scenes, and the walls in this set piece opened up to show kind of what you see in the larger picture there. At the very last moment of the play, the walls opened up, and then we had the walls of the information center plastered with statistics on homelessness and runaway children, and the cast actually used it as kind of a dramaturgical storytelling idea to post all of these different things, including research about their characters on these inside walls that were opened up at the end of the play. And because of how we had the audience set up, the audience was actually able to, after the curtain call, walk up on stage and kind of read all the different statistics and stories about the subject matter. So let's see. And then we see a couple production photos of the actual show, so you can see where we, use things like the street lamp we have in there and the basketball hoop, the chain link, and everything moved around on the Revolve. You can see in this shot a little bit more how the hardcover flats for the skyline worked in the back and allowed us to do some kind of lighting effects that, made this work and helped us kind of tell story as far as time of day and that kind of thing. Again, just the Revolve in a different position. So you can see we don't have a fly space in our space. There's not a lot of ways to bring scenery in and out. So most of the stuff either comes on and off or is built into our Revolve and our turntable. When we're doing shows, this is just one more of the kind of the street lamp, basketball, graffiti, kind of the idea of how we tried to create a space that had room to move and dance. There were times when we needed a lot of open space dancing. There were times we could shift it around and have smaller locations just for a short scene, monologue, poem, something like that. Let's see. Next. Oh, I think that's it. There's a little video at the end, but I don't think it's probably fine when we don't have it. So anyway, that's just kind of my idea of just a little way I approach storytelling as far as collaboration goes, as far as the process of initial research through implication through, through final design. So thanks.
Brett, you have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Oh my gosh. Hi.
Yep.
Thank you, Roya. My name is Brett Banakis. I'm a designer for theater, film, television, opera, and live performance. I'm based in New York City, and I'm an adjunct teacher at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, where I teach set design and set design skills. And I've also been the scenic supervisor for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child and worked on every production of that all over the world. I do a very similar thing to what Jason was talking about, and we, as set designers for theater, we work in a very sort of analog process. We still work with paper, we still work with our hands, we still work in very analog ways. And as a set designer, I really consider myself a sort of secondary artist. I'm not the creator of a text. I am the person who takes a text and adds and builds upon it and creates new ideas with it, but it starts from the seed of a text. So that's generally where I start my process of storytelling, is digging deep into that text. And I really believe from the bottom of my heart that no artist truly understands the thing that they create. And I believe that of scripts and texts and my work and everyone's work. And one of the things I try and do when I begin a process is to really dig into a text and try and unearth some of the things that are buried within it. So I do a sort of process with the text where I distill words of the text. I go through the text and I kind of pull out words that are meaningful to me, and I make a sort of smaller document. And then I do that again, I do that again, and I end up with a kind of poem about the piece that I'm working on that becomes a kind of guiding principle for my design process. And that's where I sort of begin the storytelling. And I try and have, my design partner and I call that a spine line, that we think it's like the kind of spinal cord of the idea of the narrative. And I'll begin there. Sometimes we'll also find a text that resonates with the story as well, not a distilled version of the text. And when we were working on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, we found this piece of text from Thomas Wolfe's You Can't Go Home Again that we thought was very beautiful. The director of the piece, John Tiffany, felt like because the story of Harry Potter begins in the world of humans and muggles at platform 9 3/4, and you move into that's the portal by which you move into the world of magicians, that we could take this play and sort of, that it could always exist in a train station, that it could sort of start there and evolve from this idea of being in a train station. And when we were thinking about the idea of a train station, we came across this Thomas Wolfe quote. It's really beautiful. Few buildings are vast enough to hold the sound of time. And now it seemed to him that there was a superb fitness in the fact that the one which held it better than all others should be a railroad station. For here, as nowhere else on earth, men were brought together for a moment at the beginning or end of their innumerable journeys. Here one saw their greetings and farewells. Here, in a single instant, one got the entire picture of the human destiny. Men came and went, they passed and vanished, and all were moving through the moments of their lives to death. All made small tickings in the sound of time, but the voice of time remained aloof and unperturbed, a drowsy and eternal murmur below the immense and distant roof. And it just felt like that idea of a train station as a sort of magical, changeable place where all human destiny can exist felt like such a beautiful way to begin the story of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So from there, we launch into visual research, and we start building from some of those ideas that we find in the spine. We cast a real wide net. We look for literal research, some locational research, some historical and contextual research, but then also looking for some emotional and expressionistic research. And we'd like to put it into a sort of collage like this, like I'm showing you, partly because it's important to us to kind of put our hand onto the research, to feel like I've taken these things and started to assemble them in a way that starts to begin a narrative from the beginning to the end of that. And it feels like the story is building through visual parts. And I also really believe that then the work starts talking to itself, that you look at one part of an image and it's resonating to something that's a few images away, or something that's at the beginning of the your image collage. And I'd like to get it up on the wall. So we usually take the whole wall of our studio and we'll fill it with images as we're working on something, so that they're easily available to us, and it's just out of the computer and onto the wall, and very available. And then the research sort of becomes greater than the sum of its parts, in the way that it feels like it's now a bigger thing than just a few images on a computer, or one small mood board, or something like that. Then from there we do a narrative breakdown, which isn't strictly a sort of scene breakdown, but we try and do a kind of scene breakdown in a way that uses graphical attributes, so that as we go through the story, we'll do something so that each character has a visual representation, or each scene has a visual representation, so that when I quickly look at it, I know what the scene is. So like, for example, this is our visual breakdown of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Anytime there's a red sort of house shape, that means we're in Harry's house. Anytime there's a yellow H on stage, that's Harry. Orange H is Hermione, and green R is Ron. And each location, when there's water, there's a sort of light blue underneath. But we sort of create a like graphical representation of various scenes, so that when this is up on the wall, we can get a sense of not just some sense of feeling about where we are, and a real graphical representation of the scene, so that it's very clear, like, oh, there's a lot of this one color showing up, or there's a lot of this one object showing up, or seeing stretches and patterns and things that appear in the story. One of the challenges with Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is it's 95 scenes long, and it's 5.5 hours of theater, so trying to get a sense of both the totality and the detail of what's going on was a real challenge. And breaking down the sort of scenes into these kind of visual languages were really helpful to us. That has nothing to do with scenery, really. It has to do with story and who's doing what at what given time on stage. And it's sort of, it's a way of kind of getting to what we call the stupid story. That in any story, there's a lot of complexity that's happening, but also there's a beginning, middle, and end that we want to sort of honor and feel like there's a larger arc that we're telling, in addition to the minutiae of the story throughout. Then we move into a sort of dimensional model phase, and we'll start with a white model where we'll just build pieces and things and try and move through the scenes and see how it functions and works. And at each step of the process, we'll revise the model and make it better. And it's important to us to put every single character into the model, to imbue the people in the model with the kind of life that we think the actors are going to bring to the stage. When you're dealing with a large cast show, people are architecture and people are the story, and making sure we imbue the model with all of that will just help the process along. And then we continue to develop color and detail, and go through each scene very painfully and laboriously. Photographing many times. We probably photographed through the show about 7 times of all 95 scenes as we were developing. And then this is a photo of the final version of the set in the space, which is, you could see some of the details of things that have been in those earlier versions of the model. And here are some finished production photos of the stage. And it just has such life when people and light and costume, atmosphere enter the space. It's a real sort of magic moment when every element comes together. And it's a real sort of gift for the audience, the performance of a play. And that's my little presentation. That's a little bit about the creation of the design for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Hi. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay,
Yep, we can hear.
somebody do one of these. Okay, so I just want to make sure I see my, oops. Okay. I'm not doing this, by the way. Someone else is doing that. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm Roya Sullivan. I'm the VP of Projects at Harlequin. As the guys have already told you, I used to work at Macy's. I was the director of windows at Macy's for 7 years. And before that, I worked at Bloomingdale's, various visual merchandising positions. So it's funny that the two guys that went before me is basically where I go to get my inspiration. So it's really great that they went first. But I kind of, think about what they do is, they support the actors if they're designing for an opera or play or, as they're creating their story, there's a story the actors are trying to, tell, and then they support them in telling that story. In visual merchandising, we don't have that. We don't have the actors. The merchandise is the actor. And so the scenes or the, equipment or props that we create supports the merchandise. So it has to kind of tell the story all at once, and it can't overtake the star, just very similar to these guys, because the star is the handbag, or here Hermes, as you can see, the setup, the star is the product and the brand. So I'm showing you a lot of stuff that Harlequin has done, and sometimes you think about a pop-up in Harrods may not really come, storytelling may not come to mind, but I think what is, okay, I'm gonna say next because I don't, thank you, Dina. So, that was the end product. And here's what you're looking at is what we spend a lot of time as fabricators helping the client tell their story. So, creating the right kind of space, creating the right kind of pop-up where we are celebrating the brand's identity. And someone like Harlequin, or when I was at Macy's, we work with a lot of different vendors, and everybody has a different DNA. Someone is luxury, someone is more urban, someone is, trying to tell a different story about their product. So this is what we do. We support that. And here what you're looking at is, how we supported this sort of high level luxury Hermes at, a Harrods setup. The next slide. Oh, maybe I can do it. We'll see. Oh, okay, perfect. So this is more of along the lines of telling stories around the holiday season. John Lewis Christmas windows flagship, very similar to what a Macy's window might look like. So, it's a good example to show you guys. What John Lewis does is spends a lot of time creating a commercial for the year, and people actually all around UK wait to see the commercial. This particular year in 2018, they partnered with Elton John, and what did that mean, to the customer? We know he loves his glasses. We know he wears those great boots. We know he plays his piano. So for us, to kind of create that story, and again, during the holiday season, we really don't spend a lot of time pushing the merchandise forward in an animated window like this. We really think about the story. So it really becomes the set, and the celebration of what this was, which was a partnership with Elton John. And there's a little video of this that we'll show you after. If you could go to the next slide. Here you can see, similarly to these guys, we spend a lot of time rendering, and kind of seeing how the props and the storytelling will fit in a window. And, you see the renderings there on the top right. And then, you know, what I really want to focus on also is in a window situation, and I'm sure it's the same with the scenic guys, is, you know, it is all handmade. Nothing that you see for a Christmas window for a John Lewis or a Macy's or a Bloomingdale's has existed. It is still truly an art where scenic painters and carpenters, electricians, animatronic artists, you know, hand make every possible piece that might go in a window. And really, truly, what I like to say during this period of time when I was the designer, and now for one particular brand, which was Macy's or Bloomingdale's, and now I'm helping design and create for many brands, is that, you know, we're in the experience business, and we're trying to really create this sort of memory for you, the customer, and your family. And during the Christmas season, that is what is really, really important. And that sort of storytelling will become part of your lives year after year. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. You'll see that, again, here's a complete contrast to what you looked before. All the, you know, we love things that are glitter and shiny. We love going towards it. And so, but here in a Dior situation where we did what they called the fossil, it's beautiful fabrication. And again, a wonderful craftsman at the bottom right, you know, creating the pieces, and again, hand making the pieces at the Harlequin UK shop. And then we're going to go to the next slide, which is a video, which I just, before Dina starts it, I wanted to say that the holistic part of creating windows, it includes sound, you know, all your senses. Obviously it's visual, obviously it's experiencing, but here I hope it plays well. It's sound and really encompassing you. And that's what this shows you, this video shows you, that experience. And she's gonna try. So in creating, you know, this, thanks, Dina, creating that space where, you know, the customer can be really overwhelmed by the music and the sound and the glitter and all of that. You hope that they remember this experience, and then again, brand love is achieved by, you know, hopefully going back home and saying, I experienced this at John Lewis. And so that's kind of how we continue the storytelling, you know, even after the audience has left, you know, where we had the window display. Thank you.
Thanks for all of the panelists. This was really, really wonderful. And I want to start our discussion by asking about the evolution of your careers and your process, and how it's changed over the years, and maybe a little bit of kind of lessons learned. I know we have, we often have a number of young professionals listening to our presentations or attending our RDI functions, and I'm sure they would love to hear a little bit about what you feel like you've learned along the way and what's changed in how you approach your work. Maybe we can start sort of in the same sequence we began, back to Jason, especially because you're teaching. Mm-hmm. And we'd love to also hear a little bit about the teaching process, right, creative practice and thinking?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. For me, I went to Loyola Marymount as an undergrad and graduated in '97, and their technical director was leaving then, and I basically jumped into that job right out of college and have been there ever since. So in some ways, I fell into it a little bit. I mean, I know it's what I wanted to do, was technical direction and technical theater, but the way it kind of evolved over time has been interesting, because I was very much still in a student mindset when I was in that first couple of years. A lot of the people who were undergrads were still, were my co-students while I was there, and now I was their instructor. And teaching is something, at the first couple of years, a lot of it was just construction and technical direction. And then I started to get into design a little bit, and I started to get into teaching a little bit, and that stuff has kind of taken over a little bit more, is alongside just straight technical direction for me. But I love the environment. I love the college environment. It's really, I tell people often, it's great that, a lot of the students who are your coworkers, in theater, we're all working on putting a show together, and I teach stage management and some of those things. And so I feel like they're colleagues as much as they are students. And what's really nice, I think, about that environment is it changes every 4 years. There's a whole new group of people. And you meet just wonderful people along the way. And so it's like, I have my colleagues that are my work colleagues, and I have my students who, you become friends with. And it's just a very interesting time, I think, in somebody's life when they're in college, because I often say it's like this, it's this time before you don't have lots of bills to pay and you're not looking for work. You're kind of at a creative height in some ways. There's students who come in, I want to write this play, and I'm going to direct this play, I'm going to be in this thing. And they're at this time in their lives when they don't have a lot of other, outer world pressures on. So it's a really exciting energy to kind of be around. So it makes going to work really fun. And
young.
Yeah, it makes it seem like, we always say it's like free money, because you're doing something you love doing. So for me, that's how, I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but it's a little bit of how I got to be where I am. I kind of started there in some ways, but it's evolved a little bit over time.
Great. Hey, Brett, what about you? You're on mute, by the way, Brett.
Thanks again. Sorry about that first mute problem. There's a couple of questions there. Sort of piggybacking on the teaching comment or questions, I think for me, I find that the field of design, and specifically theater and design for narrative and storytelling, is such a very niche thing. It's very specific. It takes a lot of years of practice to be good at it. I always sort of tell my students, you have to be learning the next thing, because every new story is different. And that's sort of what I love about what I do. And it's a little bit scary. Like, there's always a point. One of the things I've learned, to get back to that question, over the course of my career, is there's always a point that I think I can't do it. Like, there's always a point in a process that's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to find this thing out. And I have to trust the process, trust that I will get there, trust that I will find the thing that I'm looking for.
And it's okay to make mistakes along the way.
Absolutely. You will make mistakes, and you have to honor those mistakes and know that it's going to be a part of that process. Yeah.
It's funny, I considered going to grad school way back for set design. I think I'm going to sign up for your class now. It sounds great. No, really, the idea of threading history and literature and art and all of that together is wonderful. I loved that the idea of starting with a piece of text, and which is basically an idea or a concept, getting the words in place first, distilling it down to an essential core.
Yeah, to like a little sort of haiku or something that's like the essence of what the story is. And then those words will just keep giving back to you. Like I always go back to the spine line or back to the quote that I have whenever I'm in that moment where I'm like, I don't think I can do this. Yeah.
Very cool. Roya, what about you, that journey?
So I actually went to art school in DC, Corcoran. And when I finished art school, I couldn't figure out what to do with my degree in painting, studio arts. So I decided maybe I would just work for a year and figure it out. So I walked into a mall and went into a store called Hex. And the person there said to me, you know what, you're artistic. Maybe you can work in this department called visual merchandising. I never heard of it. I never knew what it was. I just said, like, that movie Mannequins, you mean that? And so that's kind of what happened. But, you know, I didn't love it. Let's be real. And I said, okay, I'm just going to save a lot of money and go to grad school. So then I came to New York and went to Pratt, and I studied more painting and photography. And so when I got out, because I was in the city, I said, maybe I'll be a scenic painter. And so I was a scenic painter for a while. And I got hired at Macy's to paint the backdrops in the windows, because 20 years plus ago, they didn't print these large prints of Calvin Klein models, you know, on sort of inkjet printers and all that. It was a lot of hand painting. So so that's kind of how I started. And at the same time, my love of art, photography, printmaking, I also had a great love for fashion. So you know, I started styling a lot, and then somehow it combined, and, you know, I developed this career as a visual merchandiser, which is not only windows, because that's all people think about, but when they think of visual, it's, you know, it's a lot of stuff going on in the store. My process of basically creative thinking really begins with, you know, the message that we're trying to relay, whether it's product, whether it's an event, whether it's Christmas. It isn't necessarily the text, you know, because in a commercial setting,
Sure, it's
you know, it's a different
brand.
Yeah, it's more of the event or what we're trying to relay to the customer. So yeah, so, you know, it starts there, but a lot of it is art, looking at art, looking at, you know, going to theater, going to, you know, I really love outdoor sculptures and things like, you know, when we could do Burning Man and things like that, because I like what I do, the lifespan of it is much shorter. It's 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's not a whole Broadway run where we could run like cats, you know, for many years.
Seriously, that cultural saturation, you know, obviously a lot of the young professionals who are in the store design world are interior designers and architects, and, you know, it's just so important for them to get that cultural saturation, to be going to galleries, to be seeing film, to be going to theater, to just be sponges. And I can relate to that whole visual world. You know, the early part of my career was in-house at Macy's in store design. And our friends in the visual department, their backgrounds, so many of them came from fine arts, and there's such talent there, just an amazingly talented and creative crew, really extraordinary people. And also, again, multidisciplinary, often coming with skill sets, again, talking about what Jason was also talking about early on about craftsmanship, and Brett too, with the set productions that you're doing. There's so many artisans and craftsmen that it takes. That word that I think, Brett, you used early, analog, it's not being done on the computer. The great ideas are, and the fabrication is all in a shop, and someone's building it, and it's all customized and extraordinary stuff.
Yeah, another sort of joke I have with my students is that I don't really do anything. That, you know, I don't make the drawings, I don't make the models, I don't build the sets, I don't actually push it around on stage, I don't paint it, I don't really do any of it, but I have to be capable and understanding of every single element, that to know how to make that process work as best it can. And also just to understand that because it sort of takes a village, like, know that because other people are creating the work for me, a good part of my job is to honor their craft and to try and get them to create the best work that they can create. And to sometimes that's going into collaboration with them and really feeling like they're contributing as much to the process as I am. It's not so much about like my vision of what it has to be, but how can we make this thing the best thing it can be.
One thing that sort of crosses the full spectrum of what all you do is lighting design, which also in theater too, it evolves over the course of the story, depending on the scene. The lighting is so dramatically different and can set such a different tone or mood. And I'm sure you're working very, very closely with the lighting designers who are developing the look and feel from that standpoint.
Always, yeah. Costume too. It's the same kind of thing with costume.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, true.
that color and that, what's going to set against your scenery is big. I think one of the things you were mentioning before I thought was kind of interesting is like there is some things, like some of the technology has changed and there's computer drafting and computer design and laser cutters and 3D printers, but still being able to, I think, work in an analog format, like Brett was saying, like being able to put a pencil to paper or pen to paper, or even like the 95 scene storyboard that's sketched out is still as powerful as it has been for thousands of years, even though we have lots of new neat shiny objects, which are great. Being able to make that kind of art in that way is still extremely powerful, I think.
Yeah. Someone has sent through, actually Lena, and I think this is a great thing to ask all of you. What are your recommendations for young people coming out of school right now, especially under the current circumstances of not necessarily being able to jump into their career at full force? Jason, you probably are dealing with this very direct, and Brett, very directly. But Roya, I'm sure also in the world of fashion and visual merchandising, it's the same thing. There are people who really want to build careers around these creative skill sets, but right now we're still in a bit of a holding pattern and probably will be for some time. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, in my field, and also just anybody's field, I think you have to kind of figure out how to adapt to the situation. I personally think when in any major city or even in a suburban mall situation, the exterior of buildings are becoming very important. We have to wait in lines to get into things. We have to, distance 6 feet. We have to figure out, basically pick up stuff on the curb, versus going into a store. So if I was a student today and studying scenic or even architecture, I would start thinking about messaging some ideas that way. If you were lucky enough to get an interview with someone like me or someone or any professional in sort of this type of field, maybe I would do some of my homework in advance and, prepare something, because having a great portfolio that was valid 6 months ago may not be what you want to go into an interview with. I would say prepare yourself for the future. What would that look like? And be prepared to talk about that and say what you think should happen. Design something for outside of Macy's if you have an interview with Macy's, that kind of thing.
Go ahead.
I just think you have to be agile and you just can't think the same way you did 3 months ago even,
Also following up on what I think Brett was talking about earlier regarding the analog world, when we look at portfolios of candidates, young professionals who are coming into TPG, for example, it always gets me excited when I see freehand sketching or creative process. There's a bad trend that I haven't seen signs of diminishing, where it's all finished work. Finished work doesn't tell me about how you get to where you get. Mm-hmm. I want to see the process. I want to see your thinking. I want to see the loose sketches and even your artwork, just to understand someone's mind and creativity, which you just don't quite see in a finished photo shoot of an interior or in a finished 3D model. Yes, of course, we need to make sure you've got the right skill set and that you can produce beautiful visualization, but it's really the analog where we really get to understand a young professional.
Yeah, I feel like for advice for students, the entertainment world that I come from, of theater, where people sit in a room, where 1,000 people sit in a room together, is not happening right now, and it's we don't know when that's going to start up again. So there's some trepidation, certainly in my students and a lot of people that are out there, about what's going to happen and where's it all going. I do, firmly believe that people yearn for liveness and yearn for human contact and stories being told aloud, and that will continue, and we will be telling stories like that again sometime soon. So there's just going to be a pause here for a while we have to kind of figure that out. But
Yeah.
we will be in rooms again telling stories again. And I think a time for a pause is not a bad thing. I think a time to look at yourself, look at what you're doing, and focus on your skills, do some drawing, do some work, continuing to build and hone your craft. You're never going to get a moment like this again in life to do this. So like, I'm incredibly grateful for the moments that I have now to focus on things that I would never otherwise be able to focus on. And I try and find the humanity and the grace and the beauty in what this moment is offering me now, particularly because of just what is happening in the world right now. That said, it's a great time to be in school. Like, it's a great time to be learning. It's a great time to be focusing on
Absolutely.
that stuff.
I think everyone's trying to layer some learning into their lives right now.
I wonder too, I mean, I think about that in this pause, in this time, what kind of art is going to come out of this? What kind of writing, what kind of plays are going to be written? What kind of films are going to be written? I mean, speaking just to what kind of stories are going to be told with this backdrop and this setting and this time to do that. I think it'll be really, really interesting to see.
Yeah, I actually have a question that touches on what the after will be from someone who is watching. Brittany, what design changes specifically do you think will be enacted in a COVID or post-COVID world? That could actually have to do with theater and how theater is viewed, or it could also obviously has a lot to do with retail and retail strategy. And Roya, it'd be great to get your take on that from your perspective, because you are doing pop-ups, which are
Right.
Retail, not strictly just windows anymore.
Exactly. So I think that, that there's definitely going to be a change to how we shop. We probably won't be putting up many pop-ups because practically aisles have to be much bigger. People have to distance when they're shopping. But we know from everything we see on Instagram and various other social media avenues that people still want to be part of an experience. So it is definitely scary to get back out, but we are getting back out. And from everything I've seen, people are shopping, whether they're driving to pick up their items or are, or ordering online. So shopping is not going away. Like I said, you have to just kind of think about how people will be shopping. Maybe they will feel more comfortable being outside. Outdoor theaters are becoming very popular again, drive-in theaters. So, maybe that's what we transition into before we go into a closed room. But people are going to want to be entertained. I just think that's just in the way we are. So shopping's a big part of it. We can't gather the same way, but I am very hopeful and positive that we will have a upswing, obviously once we have a vaccine, but even before that, because we will learn how to adapt to the situation. And I can tell you that brands that have opened overseas in China and Asia are doing very well. Their stores are doing very well. So that means that even though that people were not able to go out for 2 months, they're going out now. Definitely with theater, it's more difficult because it is closed. Anything outdoors, I think, like I said, the exterior buildings are becoming important. Patios will become important. So how can you design for that? How can you excite people to sit in a patio? We're all designers. We can all figure that out, and I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I've worked with some theater companies that do really site-specific work. There's this dance company in Brooklyn called Third Rail Projects, and we've done one-on-one type experiences where someone is brought through the city and listening to a track and it syncs up with a bunch of things that are happening. There's those kinds of events that can be happening. I know my design partner, Christine Jones, is working with the Armory on something now where she's trying to have like a social distance dance party where there's areas that there's going to be a sort of live event dance party thing where people can be in the same space but be distant and safe and have a shared experience. Again, I think people do want to be having shared experiences, and there's going to be all sorts of designs and events and interesting things that come out of the restrictions of this. So we always say as designers that a blank page is like the worst possible space to design in. You want to have some restraints because the restraint will bring you ideas and force you into a path. And this will just be another path that we're forced on, and there will be some amazing creative things that come out of it, I'm sure.
Crazy though, because I mean, for our department specifically, we just got to notice that we're not back on campus at least until June 30th. They're planning on opening in the fall. But we have, you know, weekly meetings with our staff and our faculty. Are we going to try and do these shows outside? You know, trying in California, there's nice weather, so doing some site-specific stuff out on the outside of our buildings or in some of our plazas is a thought. If we're not able to come back to campus, you know, we may have to try and do something indoors and film it, or the third option is kind of doing some kind of Zoom theater presentation, which nobody wants to do. But if we're not back on campus, it might be our only option this time. But it's difficult with theater and with actors and masks and then microphones and costumes and dressing rooms. There's so much, everybody's on top of each other all the time. It's very, very difficult to try and come up with a plan to do theater with a social distancing aspect. But that's our new task at the time, is how to make that work.
I have a question that's come in from Ray Eschide. Are there any key lessons you've learned or tools you've deployed during this period of isolation that will allow you to engage with your teams more powerfully when you return to a group environment? That's a lot to think about. Thanks, Ray.
I know not to ask them what they watched over the weekend.
Why did you do that once?
I know, I ask every time, oh, what are you streaming? And they all say Ozark, which we all love Ozark. But yeah, no, I think, or check on them, you know, we'll have a Zoom meeting to check on people, you know, which they've said enough. But I think it will be a long time before we all get together in an office environment. We are adjusting to the Zoom life as we are right now. But I actually, and a couple of people that work for me feel the same, that I connect better with people when we're together in a room, and I feel like the brainstorming sessions are better for that when you're all together and you see the passion in someone's you know, presentation of an idea. So, and also many of what we do is not just ideation, it's also installation. So, you know, we have a bunch of craftsmen that are going back to work because they're phase 1 fabricators. So we do love interacting with them. So I think my job will end up being 50% at home, 50% on site. And I think we're adjusting to that. And you know, visual merchandising people are adjusting to that life going forward.
Brett or Jason, lessons learned that will affect how you work with your teams? Yeah,
it's tricky. I mean, one of the things that I know that's very frustrating for my students is these days, everything is very like screen oriented, right? So there's TV and you have phones, you have iPads, that's the life, right? But then when we switched to online learning only, then it became, you know, you were learning on a screen too. So it was like another screen added to what you were normally doing, having human interaction in a class, whether it be a movement class or a voice class or whatever. Now it's all done on screen. So I think one of the things to try and that I'm trying to focus on getting people to do is, it's hard because you can't say, well, just go outside and run around and be with people, because you kind of can't do that. But getting away from just a screen format a little bit, I think is something that's a little bit of a lesson during this time, because there's so much of that already. And now it's just another element added on. So I think as much as you can kind of, whether it's reading or, you know, meditating or whatever you got to do to be out of that like screen environment for a minute, I think will help, especially because everybody is, now students, I also have students who are confined to their homes. So before, when they were on a campus, they were in their dorm, and then they were at the cafeteria, and then they were in the theater. Now they're in a one-bedroom apartment, and everything takes place in that little spot. So as much as you can get your mindset out of that and try and do little things, I think will help you kind of keep saying a little bit when things get going again.
Brett, how are you and your colleagues interacting during this time?
Forgive me, there's
That's why I'm doing the on again, off again mute too, because I've got the city screaming outside my windows wonderfully.
I don't know. I mean, I do think that if the things I've taken from this, I don't think there's any like technology I've taken from this. I mean, certainly the way that people are connecting this through these kinds of platforms reframes some of the things that, like what we can do distantly and what we can't do distantly, the things that are hard to do now and the things that are easy to do now. I find most of my work has gotten much, much harder to execute at the level that I want to be doing it at. I think if I can take anything from this, I think this sense of, again, like pause and reflection and a sense that it's that easy for things to be that different. I think the idea that that people can reframe literally the entire world within a span of a few weeks is a good lesson to walk away and think that we can be that bold with how we reframe, like trying to reframe things in the way we think about them, and being adventurous about how, well, what if it was completely 180 degrees the opposite? I think people aren't sometimes adventurous enough to like go out on a limb for things that to completely reframe the way they think about something. And I think this has given us a great lesson in that we can move into the next sort of phases with.
Huge challenges give huge opportunities. A question, Roya had mentioned taking inspiration from theater design. For theater design, what elements from the retail world would you take inspiration from? Let's flip that around.
Well, it's sort of funny. I'm working on this musical of The Devil Wears Prada right now.
Ah, yes.
Ah.
Oh, talk. Tell us more. We all love that movie.
And it has music by Elton John, which is sort of funny too. I mean, there's a lot of inspiration in the retail world, and a lot of inspiration in the way that fashion and clothes, we live all our lives through clothes, and it's about how you view yourself and how the skin that you feel, it's your second skin, and how you feel comfortable in that, and the ways that various companies present this image of yourself to you through retail is fascinating, and taking deep dives down various routes of that sort of stuff is amazing. And then and the idea of fashion shows in reference to The Devil Wears Prada, like that, is then a further kind of fantasy of that idea of fashion as art, and fashion as an expressionistic view of what it means to be human. There's a ton of inspiration in that. I'm like literally steeped in it right now. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes just even in, walking in a store that has an amazing like retail design in it, or seeing a window display. I've worked on a couple installations for window display stuff out here in Los Angeles. And it's amazing how sometimes it's not even, it'll be giant columns of styrofoam or like crazy wallpaper things, and stuff, something that's just really like out of the box. Like it doesn't necessarily have to do specifically with the mannequin with the clothes on it. That's just what's in front of a complete whiteboard display or something really kind of fascinating. I'm always thinking, I'll see something and kind of check in my mind and be like, oh, wow, it's amazing how they're using all these boxes for light. I could design something with that, or I could use that idea in a set somewhere, or everything is all plastic crates. I'm like, you could do a whole world out of this. You think, you always just kind of file it back in your brain somewhere when you see something that's kind of inspiring, whether it be like an amazing lighting display or something, something along those lines. I think when you see art in any kind of form that kind of moves you or is interesting or is fascinating, you kind of file it away thinking like, oh, this is kind of a thing I could maybe jump off at some.
Yeah. I have a few more questions that have come in. This one's specific to Brett. How do you come up with the various types of research required for each project? With that, I mean the various bits that you mentioned about the various types of visual research, emotional, impressionistic, literal, etc.
Oh, that's a very good question.
Oh, there's a part 2 to that. And does it vary with each project, or do those categories remain constant throughout your various projects?
I mean, we're always looking for new places to find inspiration, to find images, find research, find videos or references. I think the thing I always tell my students is the problem with research now is it seems so easy. You go to Google and you type in Greek column, colonnade, you type in whatever you're looking for, and the problem is it gives you exactly what you're looking for. And the problem is you're not looking for what you're looking for. You're looking for the thing that's next to what you're looking for, or across the street from what you're looking for, which is, again, going back to this Roya's comment about like steeping yourself in art, going and visiting museums, going and seeing things. Like, go, you know, every time you go to a museum, you're going to be like, oh, I want to go see the Goya show or something. But you don't know what's on floor 5 or floor 6 or floor 2. And all of that stuff is going to give you some new inspiration. When you actually go to the library and look up a book and find like the book of the research you want to be looking at, pick that book out and look at it, but also look at the 3 books to the left and the 3 books to the right, because you'll find more stuff in those that are probably actually the thing you're looking for. The problem with research is you just don't know what you're looking for until you see it. So trying to give yourself techniques that allow for that secondary and tertiary stuff that allow a sort of domino effect to happen with the research. That's where the real gold comes, because if you just look for what you're looking for, all you're going to get is what you're looking for.
It's like starting with the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Backward from the answer.
Google is too good.
Yeah,
it's
so true. Yeah.
Unexpected. Here's another one. With the struggling retail economy, and many stores now entering bankruptcy, et cetera, how can a brick and mortar store like Macy's really create a visual impact now with a minimal budget?
Well, I'm sure that one's for me. So I think that, you know, in the beginning with retailers getting back online, you know, there's going to be a lot of focus on kind of repositioning themselves with really practical things, how to, you know, keep the customer safe, how to keep the employees safe. So there's a lot of that. So, and how do you do that? You can definitely put a sticker on the floor, or you can message that sticker, or, you know, how will retailers deal with those stickers? You know, we've all seen them at Whole Foods, you know, that's where we've all been. We've been to grocery stores. We've seen the plexi and the acrylic shields. And so how, you know, now you have other surfaces to play with. You know, this is what I mean. You have to take the opportunities where they're allowed. And then just to piggyback on, you know, inspiration, I would say, you know, when people come and interview, you know, with me for a job or ask me about what I do, you know, I like to say I'm a professional noticer. You know, I like to notice things. So like Brad said, you type in something in Google and, you know, it'll come up exactly like how you typed it. But, you know, what you do in your life daily is you should be taking pictures and, you know, kind of archiving all this messaging or these ideas, and then hopefully you can pick at it. So same thing with retailers. They've been storing all these ideas, you know, they've been thinking about, this is not the first time people are not going to brick and mortar. We've been talking about this for at least 5 or 6 years. People are shopping online. You know, they've revamped all of online, you know, animations and information, and making that experience interesting. So, you know, retail is different, and brick and mortar was not what it was anyway before this. So this will give even a further push for those ones that are going to survive to rethink the way you will experience a retail space. It'll probably open a lot more safe. And then from that, it'll evolve back to having a great display as you walk into the front door, having, you know, great windows. Windows are going to do great, I feel, because like I said, it's the exterior of the buildings are becoming much more interesting. So
in fact, someone also is asking, with so many storefronts shuttered right now or boarded up, what should retailers be doing to engage with the community through these inactive windows?
well, I mean, if anyone's gone on my Instagram, you know, that's all I do is ride my bike and take pictures of the art that's happening. It's amazing. I mean, there's the chalk guy, and then there's the guy that took pictures of all the first responders with the mask, and there's different ones on each. I mean, I can go on. New York City is full of these. First, they were just plywood, then somebody painted them black, then the chalk guy went, then the graffiti artist went, and none of them are some aren't sponsored by the brand, but many of them are just people from New York City, artists, great artists going out and saying, I love New York, I love first responders, we'll survive, great messaging. I think going back, this is what's happening now. I think in the next 2 weeks, retailers are now setting up to open. I think there'll be a lot of thanking and appreciating their customers. So that'll be the first message. Yeah. And then probably back to business, Father's Day, Mother's Day, whatever it is.
It's really interesting, Roy, actually, what you're saying, and maybe kind of touching on inspiration, photographing everything. I think it's really important you see something that's fascinating, you know, to take a picture of it, because you kind of have it. We did, the first production we did last fall was The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which is a Brecht play that can be set in various locations, but our scenic designer at the time was from Wisconsin, and he had taken this beautiful picture of this old abandoned warehouse. And the entire set came out of that one photo. He did all the color renderings, we designed it. The entire thing was inspired by a photo he had taken maybe 10, 15 years ago, but he had remembered it and pulled it out, and then everything came from that. So I think you see things that inspire you, and then if there's a way you can use it, use it. If there's, a lot of times there isn't, and you don't want to be kind of fitting a square peg in a round hole. You can think maybe this is ready for another project, maybe it won't happen at all, but keep being inspired by not only art you see if you're in a museum, if you live in a city like Los Angeles or New York, and there's so much to see, but just even if you are in Wisconsin and you see an amazing old building, that's something that could become a piece of art later in a way.
Another question, what kind of work have you done outside of your own most narrow focus of expertise, but that you've applied your own skill sets to? Just how does your core skill set translate into other work that you may have done on occasion?
I mean, I still photograph. I don't paint as often. I like to, but you know, but that's sort of where I started. So kind of like going back to that, I definitely go back. But I think I live and breathe my job. It's an issue.
I mean, I think for me,
passion for design,
yeah, I think for me, it started when I started I was doing a little more stage management and directing early in my career. When I started working full time in theater and teaching, I realized I needed some kind of other creative outlet to kind of get some inspiration, kind of get some of that creativity out. So I kind of turned to songwriting in that respect. So for me, a lot of times it's like you can only, you know, if you're working theater all day and then at night you're going out and working on a play, it becomes a lot and it can be overwhelming creatively. So I try and, for me, that's why when I get away from that, I try and find some kind of other artistic expression or some way of storytelling, I think, in a different way. That's how it works for me, at least.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about your musical work.
It's you know, I was in various bands in and out of college or after college. And now we're kind of in a different, you know, there's kind of a core 3 or 4 of us, and then people move in and out. There's times when we're playing a lot, there's times when we're not playing at all, there's times when we're writing a lot, there's times when we're not at all. It's kind of a side thing, but it's a good thing to lean on, especially in times like this when, you know, maybe you're not going out and playing bars and clubs, you're home writing or trying to get a different kind of creative expression going.
It's nice to step outside our usual.
It helps.
Yeah. Can we find you on YouTube?
I'm sure there's a couple videos there somewhere. We have Instagram out
All
there.
right, we'll have to check it out.
Around.
I think we're kind of wrapping up on Q&A. Dina, shall we consider opening it up now? And Cynthia?
Yeah, so first I'd like to thank all of our panelists. And what we're going to do is we are going to open this up so that all of you attendees, if you'd like to stick around and have a drink with our panelists, you can continue to network with each other and also interact with our panelists live and on the screen if you should so choose to stick around and hang out. But I would like to take this time to really thank our panelists, Roya, Jason, and Brett. You did a fantastic job. We had some great questions coming in. Diana, thank you so much for moderating. We will have a part 2 to this series coming up in a few weeks. So please keep an eye on your emails, follow our Instagram, our Facebook, and our LinkedIn for updates on upcoming virtual events. And hopefully within the next couple of months, we may even be able to sneak in a live one somewhere when retail starts to open back
Probably
up.
outdoors.
Yeah, probably outdoors, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So Dina, if you could open it up for all attendees to join us now.
Guys, if you don't want to have your face shown, just turn off your video. Otherwise, we're going to let everyone join for a Zoom fest. All right, we still have a bunch of people listed. I don't know if we figured out, do we have to turn them on one by one? That's probably my news.
I'm not sure how
Yeah.
Dina's doing that. Dina, you can make
Yeah, I think so. I'm
working
going in
on
and just,
technology.
I'm clicking on everybody and letting them in. So if they choose
Cool.
to go on screen, they can jump on. You're all getting promoted to panelists now.
Right, yeah. Fun.
To continue the conversation a little bit while people are joining in, one of the questions that came in was I believe directed kind of to you, Roya, about what may change in terms of retail and visual merchandising and so forth, and especially due to financial constraints of some of the retailers. I do imagine you mentioned mannequin, and I foresee possibly a lot more of the visual merchandising teams actually doing a lot more of the work themselves instead of coming up with the concept and the design and passing it off to a company to manufacture, where they may be going in and hand painting things themselves to put in the windows and kind of bringing a little bit more of that creativity back. Do you think that's
Yeah, I think definitely. I think things that are made by the crew and in the stores, they always turn out great. Because I think we all had said, many of these guys that work in this field are faceted with various backgrounds, and yeah, I think the messaging will probably become simpler. It will be about the product, maybe not tons of props, maybe more vinyl, things that are printed in the store versus outside. I think all those things are options. But I do think that by fourth quarter, when Christmas, which is the most important time for retail, I feel that people are going to want to celebrate that. Go to the store and see the windows and experience all of that that comes with the holiday season in a department store on a Fifth Avenue, down the avenue and your main street. I think people are going to be nostalgic for that and want that.
See some familiar faces and some other people I don't know. Welcome, everybody. We've dropped down.
Okay, everybody, Dina, if there's a way you can unmute everybody. Lena, I love your virtual background, by the way.
That's cute, yeah.
Oh,
Palm Springs. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, panel. You guys were amazing. And what a wonderful, diverse group to hear all your different stories and all your processes was really, really cool. So thank you for your time and generosity.
Great stuff. Hey, Mark. Hey, Rayon. Hey, Morgan. Good to see you guys.
Hello. Hey, it was.
So not quite the same as being in one of our wonderful outdoor retail settings or showrooms, but hey, it's not too bad.
It's way more interesting than most of the webinars.
I think so. I think we did pretty well here.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
I mean, I love exploring, you know, creativity and different approaches to creativity. I have some little ones that are joining, and I have one that was sitting next to me, taking it all in because she's very interested in. Both of them are actually little artists, and they're constantly drawing. And Gabby over here is very interested in theater, so she found this whole thing really interesting. She loved your video, Roya.
that's the point.
Yeah.
It's very nice to see in this kind of, you know, day and age where we get so caught up with working online, virtual rendering and all, to see that you guys work. It's very, as you said, analog and, you know, like very hands-on. And just lovely sketches. It was so nice to see some things that were just so rough and kind of evolving, textured, and, you know, and also minimalist to a point where you can, just to get your idea across, you just write something as a graphic way. So it was really, really refreshing to see that. And nice to know that it's still out there in the creative world, that we're still using our hands and our sort of, being a little bit more tactile with the way our design process is.
Yeah, a lot of time I think about that time when I'm putting my hand on something, where I'm like drawing on the research or doing those things. It's like put the music on from the opera or the play, and it sort of is the same as like shower time, that kind of dream time where you're not actively trying to problem solve, but you're trying to put something on the back burner to just like let it percolate for a while. Trying to like allow yourself the time to really breathe in something that you're working on, I think is something, a practice that I always sort of try to get into, and trying to find ways to kind of let my mind tackle something in different modes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So all of you guys are so creative. What are your ways to, when you're, I mean, there must be some points where you're downtime, like, and you know, you're vegetating, or you're just like, there has to, like, is there things that you do that just sort of, you take a break from your creative process to sort of, I don't know, get a clean slate in your mind? Is that like something that...
The music. Jason talked about the music, but
yeah, but also I think sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes it's not coming. Sometimes you don't, it's not, sometimes you have to make yourself step away from it, because you can get so laser focused on the project and making this thing this way. And so I find that sometimes if I walk away, if I don't think about it, if I try and do something else for a while, and I come back to it with fresh eyes, I go, oh, here's the thing I wasn't looking at before. It could be a really fascinating way of doing it. So I think it's important sometimes to not, you know, I think we get caught up in like, if I just keep working and working and working and working, I can make it happen. But sometimes you got to, if that's forcing it in a way that it won't work. For me personally, at least.
That's like writer's block, you know. I mean, it's the same thing. It's a creative block. When you sit there and you're staring at the paper or staring at the screen for so long, eventually you lose focus on everything. So everybody needs to have an outlet to step away and, you know, go for a walk in a park, take a drive, you know, do something else, focus on something else for a while, and then, you know, give your brain a little chance to rejuvenate.
I have a question for Brent. Were you also responsible for the exterior of the building for Harry Potter?
Yeah, we put that, we designed that large 125-foot wing on the side of the building over on 43rd Street. Yeah, that was quite an undertaking. Speaking of the sort of outside of buildings, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that must have had some crazy permitting.
I was just going to say city permits, you know, putting in the architecture brain. City permits, kind of approvals process you had to go through for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually going through, talking about that question that came up earlier about fields that we work in that are not our primary field. I've been working in the last several years in architecture, design, a little bit around these theatrical venues.
Yeah.
And it is amazing to me that just a little bit of storytelling thinking entered into those kinds of worlds can unlock all sorts of things that people just aren't, that the industries themselves aren't wired to be thinking in terms of story, but humans are wired to be thinking in terms of story, so that when you present your ideas and talk in ways that relate to storytelling, people really respond. And it's shocked me that I always feel like what seems like very low-hanging fruit to a designer of theater is like mind-blowing to an architect sometimes, just because they're so steeped in code and regulations and designs
Andrew is
and materials and, you know.
I think it depends on which architects you're talking to.
No, I'm not. I don't mean to put all architects into sort of.
It's actually fascinating though, because architects often come through separate channels and paths. There are many architects that math science was their thing in school, science, technology, and others come because of the art form.
Absolutely.
So it depends. It really depends sometimes on the roots. What was that, Andrew?
It's a very different creation process, and the thought process of like theater design. I'm assuming at least that you design it for a certain lifespan, you know, and there's different aspects that you can take to, you know, play with for that specifically compared with, you know, architecture in some respects.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. But actually, I did have a question in relation to theater design. Like, when you design your set, do you design for that specific site for which it is to be performed within, or do you take it as a concept that it may actually travel from city to city, country to country, or is it really first and foremost that site itself?
More often than not, we're designing a very site-specific thing. So the proportions of the theater are set, and based on the limitations of that dictates a lot about the design. One of the great, I think, misconceptions about Broadway is that it has large theaters, because it does not. The theaters are very, very small, and trying to fit what feels like a large production in there is often very challenging. And those limitations, you know, some theaters have a big stage right and no stage left, or some upstage, or no fly space, or the sight lines are really wide, or the upstairs can't see the front of the stage, or there's all sorts of things that enter into that equation that you have to kind of design the event of the show around that. Now, we do often design touring shows too, and then that is a different backwards process of trying to find the lowest common denominator of the smallest proscenium, the smallest stage right, the smallest stage left, the shallowest space. Like, what's the smallest thing we're going to work in, and what's the biggest thing we're going to work in? How terrible is this tiny little thing going to look in the biggest space? And really trying to work out all the problems of that. So like designing a touring production is a very different exercise. And then, of course, if you design something that you don't know what's going to happen to it, you just design it the first time, and then you're always chasing that first production in the various venues. So like when we first did Harry Potter in London, that space that it was in was very uniquely proportioned. It is an almost square proscenium, and it was very deep and almost no wing space and very tall. And so everything that we designed around that kind of fit those proportions. And every single production after that, no theaters anywhere have that same proportion. So we're just trying to chase the sight lines and the feel and the proportion, and it's a little bit here and a little bit there. And a lot of what my job has been over the last 5 years on that show is all of those little tweaks to try and make the thing feel exactly the way it felt initially in a space that's not the same.
For example, for Harry Potter, have you change completely when you move from one city to another city, or is there a thread that ties everything together?
There's a thread that ties it all together. There's very finite things that change. So of the show, let's say there's 300 problems to solve, there's like 10 things that vary from space to space. That whenever I go into a theater, I can see if it's Harry Potter ready just by checking the basement and the height and a couple of things and be like, yeah, we're not going to work here, you know.
I know it's interesting when you mentioned that the different theaters. I'm from Arizona originally, and the Arizona Theater Company is a two-city operation, Tucson and Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And they do the first show in Tucson, and then they bring it to Phoenix, but the stages are very different. So what the designers, this Tucson has a much bigger proscenium, or a smaller proscenium actually, and then the Herberger in Arizona is a bigger one. So they'll design the show bigger in Tucson, and there'll be things that you don't see that are in the wings, so that when they bring it to Phoenix, it's able to fit into that space. So sometimes usually you're designing for a specific space, but like Brett was saying, if it's something that's touring or something has to move into different spaces, you have to kind of think ahead what we're going to need in both spots.
Roya, do you find any of that in your work with the pop-up? Does that ever move around, or?
Sometimes, but for example, the Macy's holiday windows that I did for many years, the Herald Square New York one is the main one, but you can't repeat that window, and so much work and effort has gone into it. So I would then move that window to a Chicago market. And then the next year I would then move it to Philadelphia, and then Philly to DC, and so forth. But it's funny, I never got the reaction that you would get when you moved your show around. I always got feedback, why are we looking at what was in New York? I always thought the same, why can't this travel? All this effort has been put into it, like a show at the Met. Maybe it's at the Louvre, and then it goes to the Met, and then maybe it's in Italy. So I always thought of it that way. But yes, of course, there would be a lot of refabrication. The gist of it, the idea, the story would stay the same, but obviously, like you guys said, it won't fit in another market because of physical reasons. So we would rebuild it and reuse it.
I just want to mention we have this time slot until 7:45. So we can feel free, whoever wants to stay on for the next 10 minutes. I know we have taken quite a bit of the panelists' time tonight.
We don't want to overextend ourselves.
Right. So if any of you have to jump off at any time, please feel free to jump off. Otherwise, we can keep the conversation going for another 10 or 12 minutes.
I'm actually going to sign off, folks. It was wonderful seeing everyone, and thank you again to the entire panel.
Take care.
All right, guys. See you again soon.
Thank you, Diana.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
I do have a questions, guys. Obviously everybody have like a very difficult question. So or some moments that your the one that you're working with is very difficult. How does storytelling help or hinders? Like this process, the design process. Is it usually a benefit to have a very strong storytelling that make the projects easier, or or can help to manage your client better?
Do you want me to take it? So, there's going to be difficult clients for any production. I'll say production for a display or for a play or a show. So, and sometimes your client isn't necessarily someone that's paying for the product, but it could be the actor, or it could be, the vendor that's being featured, or it could be an artist, So I think that the storytelling, if you're on the same page as your client, I think, of course, it's a smooth, installation or production. But if it isn't, of course, you have to work through those issues. But if a client has a story to tell and we're trying to help them and support them in telling it, obviously we have to make sure that they're heard and seen, basically.
I think, yeah, to speak that a little bit, I think collaboration, obviously in our art form, is a big part of it. And, you know, sometimes we have a student-run theater on our campus too, and oftentimes, you know, the director wants one thing and the designers have another idea, and it's a little bit of an ego thing happening, and people are kind of mixing it up a little bit. And I usually will come in and just say, listen, everybody, the end goal is the same for all of you. You all want this to be the greatest production, the greatest student play that's ever happened, right? So think about that. Think about, it always comes back to serving the play and serving the story. And sometimes you have to realize that your vision needs to be that, and not needs to be like, my vision needs to be greater than everybody else. You know, I'll tell students a lot of times my student designers, and Brett, I don't know if you have this too, is they'll come in and they'll want to design something that's just so different and so out there, right? I want this to be something we've never seen on the stage before, which is something, you know, that a young designer will want to do, but I often try and remind them that it doesn't have to be different to be good. Being good is different enough. You know, just do something really good, that'll stand out, other than something that's so out there that leave people kind of scratching their heads going, I don't understand this, right?
Yeah, it's tricky. That question's tricky. As a teacher of design, you want to foster the creative juices and make sure that they're always trying to think outside of the box. And then there are times where you're like, all right, let's bring it back in the box. Like, let's talk about, if this was your idea, let's let it go. What would it mean in terms of how you would execute that? And sometimes we get on those paths, and sometimes we kind of let them go down a path of something that we know is not really feasible because the exercise is helpful for their work on narrative or storyboarding, or you know, there's lots of reasons as a teacher we might want someone to go through an exercise.
Sure, I think it's tricky too. Some things become so precious. This is my precious idea. I have to this. I mean, the term we always say is like, you have to learn how to kill your babies, right? You have a baby that you just want so bad in this show, and you got to let it go. And it has to be the thing that was the greatest thing for a minute. And it was great to go there, but it goes.
It's becoming like more like an ego control in a way.
Sometimes I would.
Sometimes too with youngs, what I love about the young kids and the students when they come out, they have they think so outside of the box, and a lot of times you have to rein that in, especially like the young visual merchandising students, and they come up with all these great ideas, and it's like, okay, that's going to cost $100,000 to make. Let's try to simplify that a little bit. But you know, the students come out with great ideas and such amazing concepts. And then, you know, as the mentors, like, we have to try to like rein it in and teach them, you know, that is great, but how can we make this realistic? How can we make this work and happen and stay within budget, but still kind of keep that momentum and idea that you had going?
And to go back to your question about storytelling, it's like the script to me. Like, that, you know, I am not going to design a good show with a bad script. I can make something look great. I can solve the problems of that script. But if there's a bad script, it's a bad script. And so a lot of times, actually, we enjoy getting involved really early on in the process. Sometimes you get involved in a process of a show that is done, it's been done before, the script is finished, or you get a final draft of something. The more we can be involved early on with the kind of creation of what the story is and what the event is, and what things can be successful on stage, the more we can be involved in that conversation, the better. And a lot of the bigger shows I work on are in development for so long, we get to really be active players in that versions of the story come out and we can kind of respond, you know, actually, if you reframed it slightly this way, it would allow for a really interesting scenic idea, or something like that. And when we can get involved in the kind of shaping of that arc of the storytelling, that's a really joyful time for us, when we can sort of help the narrative along. But yeah, it's, you know, and it works the other way. A good script, you can't screw up the design of a really great script. Like, you know, it's going to be good.
It's so true. We say with our actors all the time too. If we have a great script and the actors are okay, the script helps them a lot. But if you have a terrible script and the greatest actors in the world, there's nothing you can do. It's just not going to be that great. You know, it starts with that story and with that. What's on the page is great. You're already, you know, going in the right direction.
Chiming in on the last few minutes of the webinar. Thank you so much, RDA New York, to kind of arrange this. This is the first session that I've attended. I'm calling in from India. And so it's wonderful. All the presentations were amazing. I was introduced by Miss Diana Bernal, if she was a part of the New York chapter for a long time, passed on the baton for the London chapter, which I'm kind of in charge for. So a quick question for Brett, actually, on his presentation was that I'd asked the question about the research and the techniques of research that you've done in order to, like, the various categories of research that you had for that specific project. When you're doing, say, another project, what are some of the techniques that you use in order to come up with those subcategories of research?
What do you mean, like come up with subcategories?
Like you mentioned about the impressionistic research, visual, emotional, all those different boards that you had.
Right. I mean, so I like to steep myself in a lot of things that I think might be wrong. Like, I like to just cast an extremely wide net and then respond to things in a way that is just, again, sort of putting on some different modes of thinking. Like, I can look at a painting or a dance piece or a photo of a building or something and think, this has nothing to do with set design, but this somehow emotionally feels right. Like, and I'll just put it in the yes pile, you know, and I can look at something and think, just the something of the way the people are in this feels like the way the people want to be on stage, and put that in a category. And that's when, like, then I collage it all together, and it's like, well, what do I have here? And things that maybe weren't an image that I thought had anything to do with set design when I took a first pass through it, now all of a sudden in a new context, they start to speak to each other in a different way, and they become greater of some of those parts initially. And it's important to me to, like, get that out of the computer and get it up on a wall so I can see the totality of all that stuff together and see how it's really creating a dialogue amongst itself. In the same way, when I'm casting my net for research, I try and look at things that I wouldn't think I want to look at. Like, there's this place in New York at the public library called the New York Public Library Picture Collection, where it's just a file of a bunch of images and folders that has been assembled over years and years and years and years. And they're just categories of images. You can just look through them, and they're pulled from magazines and photo shoots, and it's just a collection of images, and you can go through them and just categorically look through stuff. But doing that exercise of, like, looking at things you might not think and turning on parts of your brain that are looking not for, like, what the set design is going to be or what the idea is, but just aspects and parts of it that might ultimately feed the beast, you know, because you have to let yourself go that you're not going to come up with the answer. You shouldn't be looking for the next step. And the next step is that research thing. Find some images that are compelling that somehow relate to various aspects of whatever you're working on. And then something will start to percolate and grow from there, I believe.
We just hit 7:45. It's possible Zoom may cut us off at this point. I don't know if it automatically cuts off when you reach your set time limit. It hasn't. I do see it looks like 7:45 here now on my screen. So once again, I really want to thank Roya, Jason, and Brett. This was invaluable. I know that our community that joined us tonight definitely got quite a bit out of all of your presentations and your answers. And, you know, we have recorded this presentation, so the recording will be available for all those that weren't able to make the actual event tonight. So once again, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
And we really appreciated it. And who knows, maybe, you know, we can do a follow-up to this, or, you know, you guys will want to join in and listen in to the second round.
Awesome. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.